Go.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Dimension Data's Google Hangouts. Tonight we're talking about communication and collaboration, and really exploring the importance of the right infrastructure that underpins that, whether that be cloud or a mix of on-premise or hybrid, and how all of that supports the new work styles that people are engaging in today, and how communication and collaboration is changing, and what we're doing around to reflect that. Just before we start, some introductions. My name is Peter Menadue. I'm the Group General Manager for our End User Compute business. And with me I have Alex Bennett, and Alex is head of our go-to-market efforts within the business unit. And also with me, I think Steve Gage. Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Steve Gage, formerly with a company called Tellerus that was acquired by DD early this year, and working on product strategy for collaboration in the comms BU.
Thanks, Steve. And also with us, Kurt Whedon. Kurt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kurt Whedon. I'm in the ITAS business unit, and I look after product management for applications in the cloud area. Okay,
cool. And just a reminder, guys, that you're welcome to join the conversation after this hangout. I think get onto Twitter, and I think the hashtag is DD Hangouts. Hashtag DD Hangouts. If you want to add any commentary to this afterwards, we'd love to hear any feedback or thoughts you have as a follow-up for this. So with that, guys, maybe let's get started. Just to put it in context. The background is around communication and collaboration, and I don't think that's anything particularly new. Obviously, people work together and collaborate together for years, but the way that they do that is changing, and the business practices that are driving the way people do that are also changing. So we're seeing a lot more, obviously, people, mobile, people working in and out of offices, like we're doing today. We're actually hosted in one of our business partners' offices rather than DD. Kurt, as you can see from his luxurious pad, is working from his on the road. So people work that way, and where communications and collaboration was very specific around using one channel like voice or video. Now it's really across a number of channels. Things like instant messaging. Obviously, people use the traditional things like email, but now clearly video is becoming a really important part of that. And again, something like tonight's session is a good indication of that, and how people are working. So, I think that's what we want to explore. That's what we want to talk about. How that's changing, and what's the infrastructure that can really support that, and particularly with everybody moving to as a cloud and consumption, that's going to be a key part of the discussion. So maybe just to kick us off, Steve, do you want to maybe talk about what you're seeing and the trends that are impacting all of this, and we'll get going from there.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. So I think what we're seeing from a customer requirements, or what our customers are asking for, is kind of the end users are asking for the ability to use the any model, which is any device, any software client, any hardware client on any network, because they're mobile and they expect IT services to provide that class of functionality. From an IT perspective, IT organizations are looking to purchase on a consumptive model in a low risk factor, and be able to provide a consistent quality experience to their end users, but not have to invest a lot of CapEx to be able to do that, right? So that's what we're hearing from our customer base. Users want everything like they always do, right? IT is saying that's okay, but we need to be able to control it. We need to be able to buy it on a consumptive basis. From a technology trends perspective, in terms of what's going on in the market, to date we've typically seen audio and video as separate silos. So in an organization, typically every user would get an audio, right? Typically, a user always gets a phone, but video, because it's been hard and expensive, has typically been put into a separate silo, and only given to users based on a needs basis. From a technology perspective, what we're seeing is, again, end user computing power has increased considerably. So the ability for laptops to encode and decode video, much like we're all on laptops here today, the power of the internet in terms of high bandwidth, relatively high bandwidth. In the part of the world where I live on the East Coast of the U.S., 50 meg up and download speeds for mobile users is fairly common. And we've also seen a big shift towards the infrastructure that makes the video stuff happen move from a heavy hardware-based model where we'd have big boxes and data centers to software-based models running on virtual machines. Right? So significant changes in how the infrastructure is delivered from a technology perspective and a cost. And these factors, when they come together, for other applications like web and other online applications, have allowed for what we term cloud computing. And in 2014 and beyond, we're now seeing the cloud ready for voice and video communications. Right? So those are the technology trends that are enabling these types of services. So the technology result, and I'll talk about the business benefit in a second, but the technology result is that the silo between video and voice is going to break down. And users will, video will become much more democratic in terms of users will be provisioned with a voice element and a video element, and there'll no longer be this huge separation between the two. And I think that additionally, users will now be able to embrace the mobile working model, which is to say, I've got my iPad running my Link client, or I've got another type of device, or I'm on a Mac running my Link client, and I'm home today. I want to be able to communicate. I want to have the choice. Sometimes I'm going to use voice. Sometimes I'm going to use video. Sometimes it's going to be in a room system. That's the technology result. I think that the big business benefit that we see is increasing the productivity of the mobile worker. So where today the mobile worker is, shall we say, allowed or works mobily, now they'll be able to have the full functionality as if they were in the office, right? Video provides a higher level of interactivity, right? I find especially after you know the person and have spent some time with them, reading the body language, even if the quality of the video isn't as high, allows a higher degree of interactivity. It's more consistent and reliable. And I think most importantly, it extends the ecosystem of where video has typically been able to go. Typically, video has been an inter-company type approach where I could reach other people in the company, but anytime I try to reach either outside the company, people using different clients, so a B2B or a B2C approach, right, or a Link client to a Cisco Room client to a Cisco Telepresence client, life became much more difficult. So the business benefit of this new emerging technology is to allow for all those types of interaction. So now the ecosystem for who I can reach and collaborate with has just gotten much larger.
Makes a lot of sense, Steve. I mean, I think that mirrors, you know, a lot of the things that we're seeing. You know, certainly in terms of the way people are working. I think, you know, certainly what I've seen in the business over the while. You know, we used to equip people with email or more recently instant messaging, or they'd have their traditional video room-based conferencing systems that they would go and use, but that would typically be used by, you know, 20% of the business rather than everybody. And now everybody, even if their job function is within an office, things like activity-based working, where people move around an office now or work from home, certainly, you know, road warriors like us. You know, are also, you know, embracing mobility on whatever device. So the work style has changed, and I think people's expectations about how they work and how they can do that has changed as well. But I think to your point, it's not just an expectation now that people are communicating with their other employee colleagues, and traditionally, that's been a real hassle. So making a phone call to somebody outside of your business has been pretty easy because the PSTN's been around forever. Doing things like instant messaging, you know, we use things like Link, you know, extensively for that. Lots of consumer technologies that people are used to, and I think increasingly that. But now, you know, through things like this, you know, Hangouts and all sorts of other video technologies, people are much more familiar with video. But the issue has been how that works across businesses, and that's always been a challenge. So, you know, how is that changing, and you know, what are we doing about it?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. The video industry is a strange industry in terms of the fact that as opposed to moving to a consolidated standards, we seem to be adding more and more and more and more, right? therefore, the technology solution to get around these elements is this, what I call a meet me paradigm, where as opposed to me picking up the phone and dialing Pete directly, we would dial it to a central number, and therefore the security element and some of the other elements of how to arrange for those conversations becomes greatly simplified. So where we're moving towards is centralized services supporting voice and video and collaboration, and by making it a model where each endpoint dials the center, that now allows for B2B, B2C, and other types of conversations. I think there's also a new recognition among the technology suppliers, which has been enabled by the software approach, to say, we're no longer going to say we only support this, we only support this. And we've seen with Microsoft in the past few years, federation used to be difficult, right? Now it's one button, whether it's O365 or hosted, and boom, you're federated out to other partners or to other services. So I think there's a recognition from the technology vendors that the single silo approach is not going to be the be-all end-all, and the beneficiary of that are the end users, so that whether they're in the office with client X, out of the office on system Y, now they have an infrastructure that supports what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, look, that certainly makes sense. I mean, I think, the ubiquity of mobility and cross-boundary stuff means that having things hosted in silos, doesn't work. And also, even the way people operate it, I think, obviously seen a rise in cloud and consumption models, etc. In terms of, the changing face of infrastructure, people used to do all this stuff themselves. Alex, what's the approach now? What are you seeing? Why is it different? Why would I do this on cloud or try and do it on-prem? What's the differences?
I think people are looking at different ways to actually consume the applications. And you've got new software applications now, as Steve mentioned, such as Microsoft Link, but the traditional way of providing that just to an office is changing. You've got the road warriors. And one of the things we're seeing, especially in sectors such as oil and gas, is you've got a hugely transferable market force. We're working with a client which is have their upstream business, and their actual team are fluctuating between 20,000 and 30,000 people. So do you want to actually place hardware infrastructure and try and build that up and down? Or do you want to try and consume that and look at the application and go, we'll want to consume that per month, per user, and have a far more flexible offering for that workforce? One of the other things I think we're starting to see, and it's not so much just about cloud or on-prem, is the way in which this is being procured. So before, it was very much an IT department decision. They would then provide that out to the actual client. We're starting to see departments actually buy collaboration tools now. Business units have their own budget. CIOs are finding it hard to manage some of that. So people are coming into the workspace far more cognizant of how to download applications. It's becoming more of a consumer market into enterprise. And you've actually seen it this week with the announcement from Microsoft that Link will be renamed Skype for Business, because their view is that the social world and enterprise is coming together. So branding-wise, it's very important for people to be very comfortable with the applications they use at home and then into the actual work area as well.
I mean, that's a key point. I think recognition that those things join together. The Skype for Business, and it's not limited to that, and the sort of stuff that Steve was talking about in terms of cloud as something where people come together and meet me in a less formal basis with video. Obviously, there's a lot of talk around cloud, and things like email and instant messenger or whatever have been around for a while in the cloud. But Kurt, how realistic is it for people to put all this stuff in the cloud and use that as the basis? Is it real? I mean, you're a cloud guy. You clearly you're enthusiastic about cloud. But what are you seeing around people actually using it in the cloud, and what's the inhibitors, and what do they need to think about, and what's the sort of adoption?
I guess Steve mentioned the any model. I think with cloud, it's anything and everything. They want it cheaper, faster, better. They want more performance. They want more features sooner. And typically the way that's being done today is it's being delivered off, a common gigantic multi-tenant platform by some public providers. And this does a really good job for kind of the masses out there. And they hit price points and scale that just are never heard of before. And this is really appealing. And what we're seeing, and I think you've probably seen this, in our business, is that fewer and fewer of our clients are looking to go toward the old on-prem model, right? It's more of the exception than the rule anymore, and the decision is more about, okay, why wouldn't I go to this public cloud offer that sits out there with all the cost economics, all the features and the benefits? And it turns out that for many clients it is a very viable solution, but it may not do everything. It may not have all the capabilities they need. For instance, on the case of with Microsoft Lync, you can get some conferencing and IM presence, but if you're using Lync for your voice infrastructure today, well, you got to wait another 2, 3, 4 years whenever that's going to happen. Also, we see things about flexibility and agility. When you do go and take all the assets and you put them into a single platform and make them for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of clients, there's some necessary trade-offs you have to make. You can't really tailor it for each client specifically, and when you're going to upgrade that environment, everybody's going to upgrade at the same time. You can't necessarily open the doors of your data center and invite the auditors through to walk down the aisles and peruse all the data. And the risk factors that some of those things open up for clients become barriers. So they want all the benefits that this cloud can offer, but at the same time, they can't afford the downside about not being able to integrate with their legacy applications or support workloads they're already using. So they're looking for other options, other interim options. And for a set of clients, and namely, I found a lot of traction around the space, like financial services, public sector, large multinational, having a private cloud alternative that can have those cloud benefits with less of the trade-offs you have to make in going to the public cloud has been a very attractive proposition.
Applications, legacy applications, and also line of business applications, because more and more our clients aren't just looking at voice or video, they're looking at communication-enabled business processes, so driving workflow across multiple collaborative platforms, finding metadata, using that very quickly, being subject matter experts, and then communicating back to their client or their federated environments. So when you start to have those applications, such as HR applications where you can manage an interview process, all the way through from the first interviewer, recording on a platform, via videos, they call in using their personal Skype system or whatever it may be, recording that, placing it into a repository, and then the next person who is actually carrying out that recruitment interview has that information to hand, all the notes. How do you start to integrate that into a public cloud? Because it's very hard. It's quite easy on-premise. And that's the sort of questions we're getting from our clients now. We want to have the applications for our business unit. And if you can't provide that centrally, we'll go out and buy whatever is required to do that. The CIOs find that very hard. And I think one of the things Pete mentioned is workspaces for tomorrow. Actually, Dimension Data going out and talking holistically to all members of the business units and the IT together, finding out what their collaborative requirements are, and then deciding what are the best tools for them in a holistic fashion is very important, rather than going in and selling IP telephony or video as a standalone application.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty key thing. It's just an immersive part of the new workplace today. Steve, maybe a question I have for you is, so there's lots of ways that people can access some of this stuff today, or there's consumer technologies and there's some of the traditional ones. What motivates them to source some services from where, and why wouldn't they just use a bunch of consumer services and let sort of chaos reign? What's the guiding factors there?
Yeah, so a couple of different elements. I think vendors have gone from a transition model in terms of the clients used to cost money, right? So whether it was Lync endpoint or clients cost money. Now it's a razor and razor blade model, right? Where effectively you pay for infrastructure and clients are free. So when we looked initially at Skype and other free clients, they had attraction to them because the alternative was a paid client. Now that you can pay for the infrastructure, it's less so. I think the big difference has always been, and I think if we would have done a Skype consumer comparison to Link, it's deterministic behavior, right? So in the consumer space, the threshold for I've got a free model, right, is going to be I'm willing, because I'm paying nothing, to accept some variability. And it's a consumer element. I have to call you back. It's not so terrible. Bye, Mom. I'll call you again. And here's the dog waving, et cetera, et cetera. I think that when I spoke about earlier about consistent, reliable experience, from the business side of things, the mobile worker is also expecting a consistent user experience. So it doesn't have to be the best, but it has to be within a certain range.
Yeah.
I think, therefore, that will drive different behaviors in terms of saying, Google is not for me because it's a consumer-oriented, right? Or Skype consumer may not be for me, and why people will look at business scenarios. There's another really important point on the infrastructure side. I think Kurt was touching on it. Was that the internet as a medium is great because it's there, but from a deterministic, consistent delivery perspective, it's challenging, right? I could be on this call and all of a sudden I could just go down the tubes. So I think that the concept of network as a service or augmentation of internet for last mile, MPLS, et cetera, is an emerging trend that will begin to accelerate the adoption of voice and video, right? So looking at the infrastructure and understanding, okay, how do I use the internet for what it's good at and not use it for what it's not good at, that's an up-and-coming element. And I think that from a Dimension data offering perspective, we're looking at on-prem private cloud, where we manage it. We're looking at public, and we're also looking at pairing that with a network as a service model so that the transport delivers us the quality that we need to deliver successful video.
Yeah, okay. No, that makes sense. And I mean, one of the things that's interesting for me is that, you know, is not using these things in isolation. We talked about that before. You know, I think the novelty of just having a video call without, you know, maybe also working with instant messaging, or at the same time, you know, swapping emails, or, you know, having multi-party, single-party. That's the new workplace today. And
so it's what we expect, right?
Exactly, and I think that's what people expect, and the consumer experience has certainly driven that.
I was just going to add that Steve made a very valid comment there, because people still expect a certain level of quality of experience or quality of service. So regardless if they're getting it on-prem, they're getting from a cloud, a user doesn't care how it's delivered. They just want to have their tools in a way which they can speak to people. And we're seeing as cloud becomes more prominent, there's lots of traditional hosters who are trying to provide voice or video from two locations. They might have their data center in London, one in Singapore, but they're selling voice and video into Africa or into West Coast. And you get back to the issues of latency and jitter, and that experience reduces, so your collaboration reduces, and the whole point of buying the application just is negated. So I think it's an important thing, you know, which we at Dimension Data are looking at is the multiple points of presence. Yeah. Actually running exactly the same application, replicated in the same way locally, even in Africa, so that latency and jitter doesn't occur.
Yeah.
Right.
Then you
and to that point, initial cloud applications that have worked well have been non-real-time apps. So the web to start. Yeah. Email, right, and chat, okay, also because a couple of minutes, right? But when we look at real-time applications, voice and then video, the infrastructure as a service and a truly global footprint is really mandated. And I think Dimension Data is in a very good position, therefore, to be able to build and offer these services to our clients, because we're looking at all parts of the picture. We can handle the infrastructure piece, we can handle the network piece, and do it on a global basis, which is really what's required from a service provider to deliver that consistent user experience.
I'm sort of laughing to myself here because, as an unintended consequence, I think we're demonstrating this via this Hangout. You know, I'm sitting in a hotel in Seattle over a mobile Wi-Fi link. You're in the office. The guys are in a vendor office, and the lag between, you know, when words come out of your mouth and when we hear them, it's off. And you talked about that experience, that connection you have via video. When that's off like that, you know, that connection is off. And if you think about a large enterprise with, you know, assets all over the world and different networks and different, you know, infrastructure around, they don't want just to have a giant server environment sitting, you know, centrally if they can't get that whole experience. And they want to have the network, the on-prem equipment, the client devices. They want everything to deliver the outcome. They don't care how it happens so much as long as it's secure, reliable, etc. But we're sort of demonstrating that by conducting this hangout this morning.
Yeah, and Kurt, I mean, I think the point that you raised, and Steve is true, which is even though people don't care about the things that make it happen, if as you say, Steve, there's an acceptable area of the experience that people expect. There's a number of things that come together around it. The network, obviously, the infrastructure itself, the type of quality. How much Kurt can that? How can you bring that together in a cloud world? Surely that's a little harder to control than the traditional stuff. How is that going to be an inhibitor for all of this?
Well, what we've found is you can't just turn the key and move to cloud and everything's great. You actually need to apply the same or more rigor as you plan to go to sort of a new cloud model. And as you think about the operational model, it's not just about you running the assets that sit in the data center. It's about how do those network links connect in, how are you measuring the quality of service, how are you measuring the quality of experience, and how do you actually track and monitor all the on-prem devices that need to come into the picture in order to deliver that end-to-end experience. So it's really more than just a cloud service. It's a cloud service augmented by some pretty smart intelligence about the network around you, and then being able to well-manage an integrated set of components at the periphery.
Yeah, I mean, Pete, there are technologies emerging that will allow for better control. For example, Cisco is now supporting ICE in the endpoint, and what that will allow is to say, well, I don't really care. Let me get my signaling going. That can go into the cloud, and then here's my optimized media path. I don't want to get too technical, but there are technologies that are coming that, paired with standard cloud technologies, will allow for distributed real-time applications to function more better, as we would say in New York.
I was just going to add to Kurt's comment as well, is when people are looking at the cloud, they're actually looking at it by application and by geography. So people are saying, actually, I'm going to put public cloud for this application in this region because that's the best offering for us. Then they're actually going to say, I actually need a private cloud for this. I've got security concerns. I need flexibility of my applications, and I'm going to need that in this area. Ultimately, what they need is someone to manage the service so everything is delivered in the same way regardless of the mechanism again. So again, I think for us, we've got to look at how do we take them on that transformation, that journey, selecting the right applications to transfer the economic benefit to the cloud over a period of time. And that's very much based on a business and consultancy level.
No, fair enough. And so, I guess maybe to wrap things up, where is this all going? What's next, Steve? What are you seeing in terms of client adoption? What do people need to think about? How is this a now thing, or is this short term, long term?
I think we're at the early days in this cycle. I think from a dimension data standpoint, there's a recognition that these are services in terms of both the private cloud model and the public cloud model that we need to bring to market, and we are focused in 2015 to bringing some of these offerings to market for our client base. So this technology is real, and while the initial players in the field were upstarts, people like Blue Jeans and others, the technology base to deliver this on a global basis to the enterprise is available, and Dimension Data is going to follow closely behind and begin to have these types of offerings in different geographies in 2015. Okay,
cool. And Kurt, from a cloud infrastructure, cloud services perspective, how far away is all of this stuff, and what are we doing?
I think it's here. There's always more to do, but we're delivering private cloud applications that complement the public cloud services. I think part of the future is actually an integrated experience where you've got on-prem, public cloud, private cloud stitched together in an integrated whole that gives the client all the benefits and features, but allowing them to make decisions on where they operate things that deliver them the best business value with the most control and most manageable risk.
Yeah. Okay.
I think just for me closing off, I just think there is a huge amount of interest in the market at the moment with our clients around the whole area of workspaces for tomorrow, activity-based working, be it inside a building, but then also how that transfers out when you're on the street. And then the mixture between your social life and your business life and how you utilize the devices and the applications around that, be it on-premise through to the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's for me. You know, my final thoughts is when you can do this stuff and it's enabled by cloud, or you have video that's this easy to connect together and it works across businesses, you know, really changes work practices. And then you think about what are all the other things that you need to consider in terms of supporting that collaboration. You know, how do people access the data and the communicator, the documents, etc. that they use? How do they find people? All that sort of stuff. But you know, that is what is happening today. The workplace is changing, and this is all part of it. So yeah, so listen, thanks guys. You know, I think, you know, really good discussion. Enjoyed the talking to you. Thank you for your help. And guys, if you want to add to the discussion, I think again on Twitter, hashtag DD Hangouts. If you want to add any commentary there. But thanks for listening. Hopefully that's been interesting for you as well. And we'll sign off. And good luck.
Thanks, everyone.
Ciao, guys.
Bye.
Cheers.